Testing, 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 testing.
talk over here? Can I talk over here? Well, I don't know. Give you a count of 10, 9, 8, 7, 6, 5, 4, 3, 2, 1, 0. 10, 9, 8, 7, 6.
How about over on this side?
5, 4, 3, 2. Pray to Lord for saving my soul. Thank you, Lord, for making me whole. Thank you, Lord, for giving to me thy great salvation, so rich and so free.
So if people ask questions, it may be a little difficult for them to hear in there, the questions that are asked in here.
Yeah, repeat the question.
So repeat the question.
Yeah, especially because we got people in the other room. when that would be a good time to do that. In August, we have a truly awesome speaker lined up, Dr. Jerry Bergman. Dr. Jerry Bergman has over 1,800 books or articles to his name. Extremely intelligent individual, and he's going to be addressing us here. Okay, so I'm looking forward to that. I forget the name of the for sure, but what he's talking about, but I'll get it to you here in a little bit. So right now, I don't want to take any more of my stumbling and bumbling time, and we'll turn this over to Brian, who's going to speak on the genius of ancient man. And by the way, he was involved in writing the book.
Yeah.
Right?
I was.
There
Yes,
you go.
absolutely.
There you go.
Hey, Brian,
Yes,
you should just flip the switch on.
I did. It's green. How about that? You good?
Okay.
We all
Turn
good
these
with?
mics up until we figure it out. So go ahead.
Okay. All right. I'm going to pray one more time here just to kind of focus our hearts and minds here as we get started. So let's pray. Father God, thank you for this day, this time now to be able to turn to you, turn to the history of the world around us from what we can see about ancient man, and to see how people have always been new of you, and we are without excuse that you are God and our Creator, and we just pray that you would give us wisdom in all that we see and think and do to be able to glorify you. In Jesus' name, amen. All right, thank you guys for coming tonight. I appreciate it. Thanks for having me. We're going to talk tonight about the genius of ancient man, evolution's nightmare, which actually a little bit of a testimony from me, and I'll actually flip to my next slide. Currently, my wife and I and our 3 children are missionaries with Alpha Omega Institute in Grand Junction, Colorado. Before that, we actually got connected with this ministry by way of Jackson Hole Bible College, and we met there. My wife and I met at that Bible college. It's 1-year Bible college. I was there for 2 years, not because I failed the first year, but because I signed on to work on a project with them, and I didn't know really what it was, but it involved history and writing, which I never considered myself to enjoy those 2 topics as much. I like the science more, science and math, which is typically what I do, and but it turned into a book project, like you saw on the screen there, The Genius of Ancient Man. We have copies in the back. Actually, they've put out a second book now, The Secrets of Ancient Man, as well. And so you can check those out on the book table afterwards. And so that's how we got connected with Alpha Omega Institute, was through Jackson Hole Bible College, through this book project, that sort of thing. So what is Alpha Omega Institute? This is kind of a brief overview. You maybe are familiar with our ministry already. I think we've had speakers come through here before. But we help people answer evolutionary challenges. We believe that God created in 6 days, probably around 6,000 years ago, based on what the Bible does say, not what the Bible doesn't say, right? And so we believe God created, and there's good evidence from science. And I'm actually even going to pass this around right now. This handout I developed, and it kind of goes through a bunch of the major topics in science and even beyond science, showing how I think there's good evidence for our faith in the Bible as being true, our faith in God being true. So if you just want to, here, I'll pass half out on this side and half out over here. That's just a good resource. Those are some of my favorite resources, oftentimes pointing to other ministries and things, but really good starters, and feel free to make copies of that or pass that on to friends as well. Take an extra copy if you're interested. I've just enjoyed those resources so much, I want to pass those on to other people as well. So our ministry helps answer evolutionary challenges with resources like this. See evidences of God's creation, help you stand firmly on God's word and to grow in your relationship with the Lord. Those are obviously our goals in the ministry. And so AY provides teaching and training and tools to help people be equipped with a firm foundation that, yes, we can really trust the Bible, every word of it, as true. We have mountain camp adventures for families and other groups, youth groups and things like that. In fact, we have a Yellowstone creation adventure tour that is one of my favorites. And that's Labor Day weekend at the beginning of September there. And that's probably one of the best deals, one of the best values out there for a really good trip. Seeing a national park, Yellowstone, beautiful national park, but seeing it through creation and through the creation science worldview, you actually get, as opposed to getting the millions of years ideas that are so often posted everywhere, right? We have tons of tools that we want to equip you guys with. We have a whole bunch of them out on the tables in the back room there for looking at later tonight. Some of these being the answers books, I think are a good starting point if you're not familiar with those. They have quick questions, and they help you run. You don't have to read the whole book all at once. You can just, I have a question about this. Oh, it's right there. There's the question, and you can read that chapter about that question. Here's the two books I was talking about, The Genius of Ancient Man and The Secrets of Ancient Man, which, again, I was able to actually help research and write for those two books. I technically love astronomy more so than many other topics, and so this is a really good set of DVDs on astronomy and showing how the heavens declare the glory of God. And in fact, I'll be just a little advertisement. I'll be teaching on that at the sanctuary on Sunday morning this weekend on Sunday. And then bugs. We have all kinds of other cool books and DVDs back there. This is one of my favorites. Kind of actually follows somewhat of the handout that I was giving you, going through the main topics and showing you from all aspects of science, yeah, you can trust the Bible. It's true. And there is a God. This is a good one, Patterns of Evidence, the Exodus, showing how this does actually fit. The history of the Bible does seem to be true, and it fits with the history of Egypt and all these other cultures, that the Bible is trustworthy. We have a DVD set that our ministry has put together. That's in the back room there as well. Tremendous 12 sessions that teach through these different topics on creation science. We have a VBS kit that we put together as well that can be helpful for teaching in groups. And a newsletter, and actually I have a clipboard if you guys want to pass this around. That's this is what it looks like. It comes out every 2 months. We put out a new one, and they're free. So that keeps you up to date kind of on the creation, things that are happening, science topics, and different things going on in our world today. It comes with a kids section as well, with the puzzles and different things. We also have a website that we are continually adding stuff to, and just a tremendous resource. If somebody asks you a question about these things, you can go search our website. It has a really good search bar option for finding these different topics. And constantly, I'm constantly working on Facebook, adding new stuff that continually comes up, showing how we have a good strong basis for our faith in God and in the Bible. So that's been good for me to be working on, to set that up and to keep it going every day. And including YouTube as well. We have a number of our videos on YouTube as well, so check that out. So we're going to talk about this book a little bit today, or the topics that are found within this book, The Genius of Ancient Man. Again, like I said, there's two of them, The Genius and The Secrets of Ancient Man. The Secrets of Ancient Man goes kind of more into some of the different sites that we will mention tonight as well. But the goals for the book were to show people that ancient man was very intelligent. And that's something I think, just the other day we were kind of playing with the kids, and we were talking about dinosaurs, and we immediately were like acting like cavemen because the dinosaurs around. And that's kind of one of those evolutionary thoughts that is just ingrained in us that, oh, dinosaurs go with cavemen, or, well, not even in true secular science, they don't believe humans and dinosaurs live together. Mammals were very small at that point. But it's these things that are ingrained in us that we were dumb cavemen at some point in time. But that's not true. That's not the case. God created us. God created Adam and Eve. He walked with them in the garden. They could ask him questions. I would love to walk with God and ask him questions. Hey, God, can you explain quantum physics to me? How cool would that be, right? And someday, because of Jesus Christ and his sacrifice, we can actually do that, right? That will be restored. But at the very beginning, Adam and Eve, they were walking right with God, and I think they were intelligent because of that fact. So we're going to see more evidences that they were more intelligent than we give them credit for. They weren't just dumb cavemen slowly evolving these civilizations. In fact, we see civilizations just tend to pop out of nowhere. So ancient man dispersed from Babel is what we see. We see similarities that all point back to these people were connected at some point in time. These people were had the same ideas, the same cultures at some point in time, and I think that's the Tower of Babel, and then since then have dispersed across the earth. We wanted to, again, uphold the authority of Scripture, that it is true, and that the words written in Scripture, it is true history. It's good history, the history of the Jews, right? And now, and much of world history as well is contained there in the Bible. And as we look at history, we want to keep God as the priority, that he is the one that is working all these things throughout history. And we also wanted to show that the Bible is what is true. And so often in our culture, we have these counterfeit ideas, these philosophies that creep in. And the Bible tells us that we want to stay away from these philosophies of the world, right? Satan tries to counterfeit God's creation. But God's creation, God's purposes are what's true and what's right for us to live. And so you see that in the book as well. Here's an example of some of the things you see that we're going to talk about tonight. And I think just as a starter, so cool, so interesting. It's called the Antikythera mechanism. Antikythera mechanism. It was found near Antikythera, Greece, the islands off of Greece, or the waters off of Greece. And it looks like on the far right picture is what it looks like, kind of a crumbly old piece of metal or something. But when they have x-rayed it, when they've looked inside of it, you see all these gears, all these interlocking gears. I think it's more than 30 gears at least that were all put together. And I don't know if you can see, actually, I think I have a bigger picture of that right here. This was found in a shipwreck that was dated to 2nd century BC. So a long time ago, very early in the past, but you have dials and markings and math and all these different things incorporated within that, where it shows the Earth and the Moon, and it shows their rotations, revolutions, and shows where they're going to be in the sky. And so you can chart your way using this machine. It was like a kind of a mechanical computer back in the day. Very sophisticated. These people, and this was just before the time of Jesus, again, we still think of them as kind of being not as intelligent, but I don't know, I think we underrate people so often because we have that kind of mindset of people have just slowly been evolving to more and more complex or more and more intelligent over time, and that's not always the case. You see on the screen here a list of a whole bunch of different significant sites, some of which we'll talk about today, others we won't talk about tonight, and you can definitely look into this stuff. A lot of interesting things, and some of these things they're mysterious, they're unknown, and I don't even know how to explain most of these places too. But I think with all of this, we want to kind of step back and kind of take a lot of this with a grain of salt, maybe a big grain of salt, or a warning here. We want to be careful. We want to be prepared to think, because you see things on TV today like Ancient Aliens. I don't know if you've seen that TV show where they go out and they talk about those different sites, and they say, oh, see, people were smarter back then, which at least I'm glad that they're recognizing that. They're keying into something that's so often, I think, overlooked. And so good for them on that. But they take it maybe a step further. They likely, many of them maybe, don't believe in the biblical God. And so it's fair game from there. And they come up with these crazy ideas that aliens must have helped them build the pyramids, or build, this or that or whatever. So we want to be very careful when we look at these different places, these different things. And honestly, I don't know that I would disregard demonic activity in some of the events and some of the playing out of the, now I can't prove that obviously, and that's just conjecture. So that's where we need to be careful. There's a lot of conjecture, there's a lot of ideas that can sometimes be thrown out. So be prepared to think in this. Obviously, as you're part of the club, you've probably heard this before, that when we look at science and even history, archaeology, there's a lot of interpreting that has to be done because we weren't there to see it with our own eyes. And so we have to interpret the evidence we do have. So that's a big thing. Here's another example. These are mounds near St. Louis, the Cahokia Mounds. And I like how there was a researcher there at those mounds, and we'll talk briefly about this later, but this researcher talks about how you put 3 archaeologists in a room together, and they're studying the same facts, the same evidence, right? And they come out with 5 different opinions. But that doesn't make sense, does it? That you would have 3 archaeologists working with the same evidence come out with 5 different opinions, right? The math there doesn't make sense. And that's, I think, so often the case in science, not always, where sometimes you do an experiment, you get the results, and you can pretty much tell this is how it happens. But a lot of times, you have to make assumptions, especially when you're looking at past events. You have to make assumptions about past events. So you can come out with different conclusions, kind of like creation and evolution or naturalism. 2 different ideas, 2 different worldviews. We take different approaches to the evidence and we come out with different conclusions. So example here, with the naturalistic timeline, you have a Big Bang, 13.7 billion years ago. The sun was formed probably 4.54 billion years ago. I'm just trying to kind of put us in perspective here of how their timeline is different, very different than our timeline. The Earth formed very soon after the sun had itself formed, and then 4.2 to 3.8 billion years ago, things started evolving, and you then 195,000 years ago or so, 200,000 years ago, is when they say you finally have the real Homo sapien species coming out of the pre-human states, from monkeys to cavemen and to us as Homo sapiens, real humans, right? But it's not till almost 200,000 years ago. Then it's not till about 12, 14,000 years ago from now that people started gathering together in cities. So this is kind of the idea, is they started gathering in cities not that long ago. And that's where we first start seeing more progress, more technology. And then writing didn't happen until 4, 5, 6,000 years ago at the most, according to them. Now you see, whenever you start talking about dates from an evolutionary timeline, the further back on the timeline you go, the fuzzier it gets. And so a lot of times you'll see a news network put out something about this artifact found and it's 15,000 years old. Take that with a heavy grain of salt, because they're using their lens to interpret, okay, when was this found, or what layer was this found, and how does it look today? But notice the last 15,000 years or whatever, it's nothing on their time scale. And notice too, when you have billions of years that you're trying to deal with and talk about and explain, from the evidence we have today, you have to make up a lot of, you have to assume a lot of things. Call them stories maybe, and some of them may be good hypotheses, but does it really pan out in the end? I don't think it does. I don't think they are ultimately good hypotheses. I think this is a better explanation of history as we know it today, that in the beginning, right, God created the heavens and the earth. Usher and some others have pointed to it as 4004 BC. I don't put that exact date. It could be plus or minus who knows how many years, but around 4000 BC, we might say. And then after the creation, we have the fall of Adam and Eve, right? They left the garden. And again, this is putting us in perspective of the timeline of history. Then you have the flood of Noah's time, and again, that's estimated at, that's BC, so that's about 4,400 years ago or so. You have the Tower of Babel a few hundred years after that. The pyramids are listed as about that age. Some people have even hypothesized that that Abraham might have been there at the time when the pyramids were going up and that sort of thing. 1,000 years ago, you had King David. 1,000 BC, that's 3,000 years ago, it was King David and Goliath. 2,000 years ago was the cross, and then we have today finally there. So timeline is very different. Again, when you see those time numbers of 15,000, 20,000, 30,000 years, I would put that, you know, I would put that shortly after the Tower of Babel or things like that, where, yeah, people were more primitive back then, as I think they're leaving the Tower of Babel. I think you have, when you've left home and you're traveling for long distances across the globe, spreading out, yeah, sometimes you might just grab a rock and use it as a hammer for a while because you left your other nice craftsman tools back, you know, in Babel or something like that. Couldn't carry it with you. So, and again, all this building perspective. Before the flood, you know, think about your birthday, you know, year one. Imagine living to 120. Can you imagine that? Maybe. It's possible in this day and age. It's not common. It's rare. But imagine, and that'd be a lot of candles, right? But imagine if you lived before the flood, if you lived hundreds of years, and I think the environment and our bodies were made to live a long time because of the fall and genetic mutations and things like that that have happened. We don't live as long today, and so, but imagine if you lived hundreds of years, what you could do. And just to put it in perspective for us, Newton lived, you know, in the 1700s, and came up with the idea of, or determined, put together the laws of physics from what were already there. And he died at a pretty old, 84 years, okay? Imagine Albert Einstein lived in the 18th and 19th centuries. He died at a fairly good 76 years old, right? But imagine if they lived hundreds of years, what could they have come up with, and even overlapping each other, maybe working together for a few hundred years as well. Imagine what they could have come up with. So when you look at before the flood, when you look at before Noah's Ark, people were living 900 years. They could have come up, you know, maybe I'll be a farmer for the next 50 or 80 years, you know. Then maybe I'll take up being a doctor or something like that. You know, they could have been very intelligent, and that would have been a lot of candles on their birthday cake, right? So before the flood, look at the technologies, or at least the intelligence that they had. And again, it might have been not as sophisticated like we have with metal and, well, I don't know, there was some metalworking back in those days. And but just, as we read through the Bible, this is what we see. People were fairly intelligent. I mean, Noah built that big ark over 100 years' time. He was building this ark, and I think it was very well done. You can go and learn more about that in Kentucky, right? If you've heard of that ark out there in Kentucky. But then a lot of things, it's hard to say, what really could have survived during the flood. As we see water, like this example with this is a drainage tube out of the Glen Canyon Dam, just eaten up by a surge of water going through this tube at high pressure. And water can really do a lot of damage. So it's hard to say what really is survived as far as technology and things go. But water does quite a lot of destruction. In fact, we see rock layers bent and folded and smashed and curved and everything else. So think about dating methods, and not that kind of dating methods actually, but the dating methods of how do we come up with the ages for this artifact, let's say. So you have an artifact, you have sometimes you have pieces that actually have writing on them, and they say, who lived at what time, and this king lived, and he, was ruling for 15 years or whatever, and then his son, took over. So when you're dating things, this is a very reliable source for coming up with, okay, what number, how old is this item? Coins also do a really good job of that too. Then you have relative, so I would call that historical dating methods. They're historical dating methods. Then you have relative dating methods where, well, this layer is underneath this layer, so it's obviously going to be older than this one. And so that's just kind of, you have to make some guesswork there. That's the idea of stratigraphy, or even pottery is somewhat like that, where you have an evolution to some degree of these pots. And again, these are still assumptions though, so I don't know if we can completely say these pots only came from this time period, but I think oftentimes this is fairly accurate. But then sometimes, notice how we're seeing assumptions with these things, where they use fossils to date the rock layers and things like that, where you have the coelacanth fish, and they used to say, oh yeah, that went extinct 70 million years ago. And so when they found the coelacanth, they knew it had to be this rock had to be at least 70 million years old or older. And then we found them living off of the coast of Madagascar today. People were hunting, fishing them and eating them in modern day. They still have them around today. Like the ginkgo tree, they used to think, oh, it went extinct 50 million years ago, 51 million years ago, or whatever. So when they found the ginkgo leaves or wood or whatever in fossils, they thought, oh yeah, it must have been at least 51 million years old. Well, not necessarily, because we still have ginkgo trees today. So we can't always rely on those methods. And then we have absolute dating methods. Absolute, using science, using radiometric dating to come up with how old an item is. But there's a lot of assumptions that come into play with that, and here's just a few of them, three basic ones especially that oftentimes you'll hear. Maybe the decay rate has changed, or we don't know what it was in the past. So I don't know, there's a lot of assumptions that have to be made. So with these three types of dating methods, they're based on assumptions, and errors can oftentimes still happen. In fact, we see evidence of radiometric dating of rocks today that we know they formed from Mount St. Helens, 40 years ago, right? Mount St. Helens, when it erupted, formed this rock. It came up with results that were like, I can't remember now, 300 million years or something like that. But we know it was only 40 years ago. So that can't be true. It's not always reliable anyways, because it's based on assumptions. And then, so moving on, as we look at Babel, if you remember the story of Babel, the people came together, built this tower to basically show how strong and mighty they were, how awesome they were, that they could build this huge tower up to the heavens. And it even references that they were worshiping the heavens, worshiping the stars. And obviously God didn't like that. So no, guys, you got to leave. Get out. I told you to spread out, fill the earth, and don't worship yourselves or stars or whatever. But when, we already talked about, when they're leaving Babel, they're splitting up into people groups or families, likely. They're losing their collaboration, they're losing their technology as they're leaving Babel. So I think that's a huge aspect we don't want to take lightly. That does mark archaeology as we look around the globe at these different archaeological sites and evidence. You look at family trees like this, and it's interesting. There's a lot of cultures. You can see how, Asian cultures, down on the lower part of the scale here, you have a lot of these Asian cultures that we know they're fairly closely connected, and we're especially seeing that today with genetic testing. You can tell who's related to who and how far back in time did they split apart. We're seeing them all come back to the same place, and some people groups, and this is actually from the Bible, what we can see as far as all the people that have lived coming down from Adam and Eve. And here's Noah and his 3 sons, kind of just partway down there. And then coming down, some people groups around the world actually have genealogies that go back this far, and it looks like they're pointing to the 3 sons of Noah, or even Noah himself. So fascinating research there. You'd have to look into more. And again, genetically, we can see. Now, this is a map showing from the secular idea that we came out of Africa. We might have, I don't know exactly where the Noah's Ark landed, but it's showing they're all coming from the same people group and spreading out, and Africa tends to be the older genetics that have survived in that sense. So they base this still on the thousands of years, right? Hundreds of thousands of years, whereas I think it happened just a few, 6 or 4,000 years ago, or something like that. In fact, when we look at languages, you look at all the different languages on the outside of this ring here that we have today, we know a lot of them are connected to one another and have, to some degree, evolved, if you want to use that word, changed from each other. And they break it down, and I think they say that they come up with about 20 different languages. 20 different languages, and you can see again here, it's kind of a web of languages in this picture, showing all the languages today and how they're connected at some point in the past, maybe 20 different languages or so. And think about that, 20 different languages that seem to they don't have any common connection between them. We don't know how they evolved over, the 200,000 years, right, according to their timeline. But I think it fits with the Tower of Babel, where these languages came out of nowhere, really. Where secular linguists are puzzled by the existence of 20 or so language families in the world today. This is a problem for secular linguists. How did these language families come into existence? Only Genesis provides a credible explanation. I think the Bible fits really well with what we see studying the language groups, the language families. So we have people leaving the Tower of Babel, spreading out to different parts of the globe according to their families and things like that. You can read a lot more about that in books like One Race, One Blood, One Race, by Ken Ham. That's a good one on that sort of topic, showing the people groups, how we are one race of people. We are one species of people, no matter what your skin color is. But after Babel, this is again after the flood, and after the flood you have, during the flood you have continents spreading apart rather quickly, it looks like. Lots of volcanoes and things going off, so the water in the oceans is going to be very warm, very hot right there. And so that's going to evaporate quite a bit. And as the air moves over top of the continents, you're going to get a lot of water in the form of rain maybe, or in wintertime, ice and snow. That's going to build up very quickly because a lot's evaporating. And so it's going to build up quicker than it will melt off in the spring or in the summer. So you're going to build up these layers of ice and snow on continents. And so we actually have, from the flood model, a good explanation for the Ice Age, which The secular models, they figure, they assume, well, maybe it's the sun cycles and things like that, you know, depending on our distance from the sun and how the moon affects that too, that maybe the earth was colder at some point in time. Well, they have a lot of problems with that too, which is, I'll talk about a little bit on Sunday actually in my astronomy talk. We have a good explanation for the Ice Age, and they don't, I wouldn't say they have a good explanation for it. So after the time of the flood, probably even during the time of Babel, you have this Ice Age. People are spreading out across the globe, even into North America. As you see, this would be on the left here, Asia, and coming across the land bridge, because as you have all that precipitation out of the oceans on the continents, the oceans will go down, right? You get these land bridges exposed from Asia to North America, and from Asia, Southeast Asia, down to Australia. So kangaroos actually would have hopped from Asia, from the Noah's Ark, right? And they would have hopped all the way down to Australia. That's how kangaroos got to Australia. But notice too, during this time of the Ice Age, you want to live somewhere nice because it's cold in other places. There's a lot of snow and ice on the continents. You want to live where it's nice. We like to live where it's nice, like the beach. Well, I don't know, maybe some of you are mountain people because you're here in Colorado. I'm a mountain person. But a lot of people liked building on the coastline, right? Where you get the ocean right there. You get food, you know, by fish and things right there on the coast. There's actually a lot of places that it looks like, and I'm not sure about this one. So this one's a little bit, you know, again, we want to be careful and, you know, still want to be skeptical about these things. But it looks like there's, around the globe, a lot of places that there could be old ancient sites underneath the water, because as the ice melted after the Ice Age, the water levels rose. Some people even think maybe that's, and this is my question, is maybe that's, again, this is conjecture, maybe these coastline cities are the cities of Atlantis that were flooded eventually with the melting ice and snow. Or at least that's the basis for it, the myth that we have today of Atlantis. I don't know, take that with a big grain of salt. But we have places around the globe, and this could just be natural fracturing of the rock with these sharp edges. This is off the coast of Japan, the Yonaguni Monument. I don't know about this exactly, but at least I was watching a documentary about this, and there's these two experts, and they were talking about this, and they've both been there and scuba dived down there. And one of them says, yes, this is man-made, and the other one says, no, it's not man-made, it could be natural. But it could be man-made. But they're adamantly kind of going back and forth, and that shows us, again, at least as an illustration, science isn't all about, you know, one thing equals another thing. Sometimes it's like, well, here's the evidence. What best fits the evidence? And we have to interpret it, and these two scientists are coming out with different conclusions from the same evidence. So we always need to be skeptical. We always need to be observing and learning. So that's Yonaguni. Some people think that might be a face down there carved into the rock. There's another picture of it there. There's a place in the Caribbean called the Bimini Road. Could be a pathway, a road. Or it could be natural rock formation. I'm not exactly sure. Again, take it with a grain of salt. But Dwarka, India, you see these stones here. Could be man-made, and it looks like some of these could look like actual house settlements like we see contemporary to the time period of the Ice Age or to ancient man in other places. I think there's a lot that could be developed with this sort of research, because people, scientists, are assuming, well, the Ice Age happened so long ago, and people weren't advanced enough to be building in these areas along the coast. We don't expect there to really be anything down there. But from our point of view, I think there might be a lot more down under the water than what we would even, what we know of today. This one's interesting. The Darin Kuyou caves in Turkey I believe it's Christians used this during the persecution in early church history to escape the persecution and things. But they're much older than that, and the legends about these caves is that people built them to escape evil or dark winters, which, again, take this a little skeptically, but it could be talking about maybe the Ice Age or something like that, where they're escaping the harsher winter environments. It's like, yeah, what is it, 13 levels or something. This is an interesting site. I know I'm going fast and I'm jumping from thing to thing, but that's what I like to do, is just take all this evidence and you go home and do some research. But again, be careful, because some of these websites, some of these videos and things, they don't have a biblical worldview, and so they're interpreting it in different ways. The aliens helped us build these things, right? I don't think that's true. But here's an example from Alaska, where they build these huts down into the permafrost, down into the ground, and they hold it up with whale bones and things at the entrance there, because they're hunting and using whales right on the coast there. But this is typical of what they would have lived in, and there's hundreds of them that are being excavated by a couple of universities, are doing research projects there. But what's interesting about these pit homes that would have, I think it was on average, 5 or 6 people, a family of 5 or 6 would live in each pit. It's dug into what is today permafrost or frozen ground, and so it talks about how if these people were to dig these out of the frozen ground, it would take, every day you would go only just a couple inches in one day's work or something like that. It would take tremendous amounts of time to dig all these pits houses out of there, because the ground is frozen, or at least frozen from, at the top there. But if this wasn't that far in the past, if the region, if the climate was warmer and was just starting maybe at the beginning of the Ice Age, as people are coming across the land bridge, it's maybe not frozen yet. Maybe they did dig this out when the ground wasn't frozen. Interesting. I'm not sure. But again, with a lot of these different sites, with a lot of the different evidences, artifacts that we have, we see things that are similarities within these different things, and all kinds of different topics that we'll talk a little bit about. People had a similar idea or understanding of the world around them, which we'll see. In fact, here's the big examples, right? The Giza Pyramids in Egypt, beautiful pyramids, right? 3 big ones, and then all the ones scattered all throughout Egypt too, right? Here's the King's Chamber in the Great Pyramid. And a lot of these pyramids were used for spiritual, religious ceremonies and things. So there's a lot of spiritual, religious influence there, like there was at the Tower of Babel. We see this all over the globe, though. Here's another example in Egypt. Here's one in Mexico. Again, a lot of religious symbolism tied in, even things about snakes and other things, which snakes, if you remember, with the serpent in the Garden of Eden. There's snake worship kind of all over the world, or star worship. A lot of these are aligned with the stars. Worshiping the creation rather than the creator, right, is what many people were doing. Here's one in Iraq. It's a ziggurat, but again, very similar in structure. Temples here in Indonesia. Here's another one in Mexico. Here's another one in Egypt, and it's interesting. Here's one in Mexico, and they say actually, if you were to, the jungle has kind of taken over in a lot of these places, especially in Central America and South America. If you cleared out the forests and things, you'd find a whole lot more there. They just don't have the, they're working on it, but there's a lot more research that could be done here too. Clearing the forest, these were big civilizations that we're seeing, connected many times, these civilizations that were connected as people not just small clans here and there, right? Look at the architecture in places like this. Very flat and very smooth. There's a pyramid. Oh, that's weird. Who's that guy? Here's another one in Egypt, and actually some of them, they say the pyramids were better earlier, and then as Egypt declined in power and wealth and stature as a nation, which I wonder how that happened, the Exodus kind of took it out of them, right? And that fits very well with secular history of Egypt. We see the pyramids got worse and worse as time went on. They lost their slave force and whatever. It seems like it fits very well with biblical history as we know it. Here we see another one in Egypt. Here's a pyramid in China. And there's many places where some people just conjecture maybe this was man-made, this hill or mountain was man-made. We had tons of mounds all over America when people started civilizing, populating America. They started using the mounds as well, fill dirt for what they needed dirt for, in their fields or building houses or whatever. And so you had tremendous amount of mounds that were built by these different civilizations, these different Native American cultures. They were mound builders. They built them up, and we see they had trade routes that were very well connected. You can go to, I think, Machu Picchu, or Mesa Verde and Grand Canyon and places like that, and they had parrot feathers that came from South America. People were traveling to and fro, connected, I think more intelligent than we give them credit for, more connected, more advanced than we give them credit for. Here's the Cahokia Mounds near St. Louis, again as well, the mound that I was talking about earlier. And you see over here, well, we might actually get to that later, a wood henge, like Stonehenge, kind of, which again, those are connected with the stars, astronomically aligned, and a lot of religious symbolism to that. So they're very well connected. Actually, this is an interesting one in Ohio, Serpent Mound. And what it looks like, here's the drawing, here's the real thing, and the drawing. It's the serpent eating what looks like an egg or something like that. And this is just, again, this is conjecture to some degree, but notice this verse in Genesis 3:15, I will put enmity between thee and the woman, and between thy seed and her seed. It shall bruise thy head, and thou shalt bruise his heel. The seed, or eggs, are oftentimes looked at as the seed of the woman, right? You have serpent worship. You have serpents, in this case, eating an egg or something like that here. Interesting. Again, this is somewhat conjecture, but we're still building pyramids today. Showing our significance, showing our wealth and our power and whatever else. We see other things that were similar all across the globe as well, like these, what they're called dolmens. They're just big stacks of rock, which, why did they take so much time and so much effort to move these big stones? That's pretty advanced too, to be able to move such big stones and prop them into place. And we see these sort of stone dolmens all over the world, in Ireland often, in other parts of Europe. Here's one in Spain, another one in Ireland. Here's one in the Stonehenge in England. And again, know that Stonehenge is astronomically aligned for possibly worship of the sun, moon, and stars. Here's one in England as well, Ireland. Here's one in Egypt that they've discovered, a stone circle in Egypt. And like I said, in the Cahokia Mounds, there was a wood henge. And you see henges in different places around the world. So similarities between these cultures. And advanced cultures, I'd say. And here's a picture. Behind the lady is this wall here. And it's, look at all the cracks in the wall. Either they carved these stones just perfect, or they poured them just right. These people were not, and oftentimes we're building on top of these stone walls that have lasted for hundreds or maybe thousands of years, because they're so well built. We're building kind of crumbly, nice walls in modern sense today on top of that. We don't build walls like they did back then. That would take time, that would take effort, that would take intelligence, things like that. Machu Picchu, they moved a lot of stone to make Machu Picchu and many of these other formations. This is in Cusco, Peru. Look at this big stone walls, and to zoom in on those walls, I'll show you in just a minute. Here's some windows from Machu Picchu. Again, notice nice square angles and cuts, and notice the angles in some of these blocks here again as well, with the jagged lines there where they're puzzle pieced into place. These are those big walls. Notice how big some of these stones are. It took tremendous technology or advanced teamwork and everything else to be able to put these stones together. Notice the puzzle shape of these stones. Very well built. People were intelligent in the past. We weren't just dumb cavemen, is the idea. Oh, and here's a place, this is interesting, Pumapunku. You have a lot of these stones that are just kind of strewn apart, but they look like they've been drilled in with drill marks, drill holes. Very nice holes. Did they use tools? Like, what kind of tools were they using? And you see here, some of them look like Lego blocks that would stick together or fit together very precisely. In those cases, like an H shape. So advanced peoples building advanced cultures or advanced communities, right? In many cases, they also had this technology where they would melt, I believe it was bronze or iron or something here, to pour into these eye-shaped carvings to keep these blocks held together as well. You see that in a lot of places. But notice the flat surfaces and the sharp angles. The huge size of some of these things. This is the stone of the pregnant woman, is what it's called in Lebanon. And here's another picture of it. Now they abandoned that one apparently, but there's other places where they've used these huge stones in some of these other temples and buildings. Here's one in Lebanon as well, at the temple, the Trilithon of Baalbek. People were pretty advanced thousands of years ago. So those are huge stones if you saw those. Here's a huge column, erected, put together there. We see all over the world people had technology of harnessing the water, making terraces for these different things. Extreme complexity, extreme design with these water systems. So there's a place, do I have it in here? Again, more terracing to harness the water flow, to harness the fields and things. They were making, this is fountains that you had running water going through this area. I think they had a place in India that had a really well done sewer system thousands of years ago. There's one right there. Pakistan had a sewer system there as well. You see places where they use boats on the lakes. Right here's Lake Titicaca in Peru, and they have these reed boats that they fashioned together. Here's a really big example, and some people I think there's good evidence, that they were going across the oceans with these large boats, and they were ocean traveling, and they, I think, probably knew how to orient themselves and where they were going to get to those Asian islands and different things like that. But these are boats in Peru. These are boats in Egypt. They're built very much the same. There's a lot of similarity to these boats, and there's myths, legends, there's talk of people groups coming and helping, at least in South America, I believe, helping them develop these skills and develop these boats. People coming from afar. I think there was more world travel than we currently believe, 3,000 to 4,000 years ago. Before the Vikings, before Christopher Columbus, things like that. Again, this is conjecture still to some degree, but I think there's evidence for it. Here's the Piri Reis map of 1513. That's how old it is. I think it's actually written on there, 1513. And it actually shows a coastline of what looks like it could be Antarctica, which Antarctica wasn't discovered until the 1800s. But I think people were discovering these things anew and were traveling longer ago than we expect them to. These are maps of, sometimes they're maps that were reprinted from older maps that were decaying away and reprinted and reprinted. Here's the Orontius Phineas map of 1531, and again you see Antarctica there. Before we knew about Antarctica, and this was just at the time when Christopher Columbus was discovering the Americas, a little after that, but people didn't have good maps of that, at least that we think, but we have a couple of maps here showing these things. So again, it's interesting, we just see so often that civilization seems to just pop out of nowhere, is what you look at. And this author says, it looks like these civilizations emerged all at once and fully formed. Not developing slowly, not slowly evolving. We see creation myths all around the world that many of them are distorted from what the Bible says, but there's many similarities too. Especially with the flood myths, we see that. All over the world we see flood myths where people are, I think, remembering the same event all over the place. The same event is described, and again, many of them are distorted. They're not as well kept as the Bible. So I think that's good evidence that we can trust the Bible, that it's you read it and it still sounds like history because it talks about, for 40 days it rained, and for 150 days the water went up and went down, and things like that. So it's kind of like Noah's ship log, where it's very historical in the way it's written. It's the history of the Jews. They wouldn't make these things up unless they were true, really. But I think there's enough similarities with those myths that it looks like we're all remembering the same events. Many cultures have Tower of Babel myths that they talk about. Oh yeah, there was this, our ancestors built this tower, but then were confused and sent away, and now we live here, or something like that. And then again, it might be distorted from what's in the Bible, but that gives us good confidence, I think, in the Bible being true. So all over the world, we find cultural legends and myths that closely resemble certain accounts in Scripture, such as the creation, the fall, the flood, and the Tower of Babel accounts. Such striking similarities between creation myths, or creation stories, from numerous cultures worldwide and the Genesis account have been hard to explain for evolutionists. Why are they all making up these same ideas with such similarity to them? Sure, they all can have an idea of where we came from as humans, but there's a lot of similarities there, and especially with the flood, you see that with the flood. The more green on the chart here with these different cultures, columns along the top are the different cultures, people groups. The more green here shows how close it was to the biblical account. There's a lot of similarities to what we have in the Bible. And we see the snake worship and the star worship, and actually we all have the same names for the constellations. And some people even say that potentially, now they've been distorted, but potentially there could be the gospel written out in the stars. And some people say that possibly Seth or somebody like that came up with the constellations. Again, I'm not sure about that, so go do your homework on that. We always want to keep doing our homework, keep studying, keep learning about these things. But yeah, similarities in cultures all over the world, and it's all pointing, I think, to the fact that we're remembering the same things. In my mind, you look back at, it's so far away from us today when we look back at Jesus, the time of Jesus. And some people even wonder if he was a real person. Now, I think there's a lot of good evidence that shows that, yes, he was a real person. Scholars overwhelmingly agree that, yes, Jesus existed. There were followers who believed he died on the cross. He rose from the dead. from evidence coming from people who were even enemies, Jews or Romans or things like that, that we can say, yeah, it looks like they were recording the same things we were. So we've got, but it's so far removed to us today, even though I think we still have good evidence for it. But think back in the past as you go further and further into the past, and you have the Tower of Babel. Well, you have the flood, and for hundreds of years after the flood, oh yeah, of course we came off of the boat. You know, my great grandfather Noah, you know, got off the ark, and you know, I'm of Seth's line or whatever, or not Seth, Shem, and they all had that common knowledge. Oh, okay, you know, the Philistines in the Bible. Oh yeah, we know we should be following the Creator God, but we're not. And so I think, you know, some of those punishments and things were warranted. We all fall short of following God, fall short of the glory of God. We all sin. We all mess up. But we are without excuse. We all know that there is a God, as we hear in the Bible, and we have that evidence still today that these things are true, that we do need to turn our hearts and our minds to trust in the Lord Jesus with our hearts and minds, to accept him by faith. And God is working through that to restore his initial creation. Even though we're living in that sin, we're living in that curse, if we believe in Jesus, we get to live forever with God, who has taken our punishment. So that's the key right there. So just remember, ancient man was very intelligent. Adam and Eve walked with the garden, and they lived for hundreds of years. You could probably go back to Adam and Eve and talk to them. What was it like to live in the garden? I wondered, did they have belly buttons or not? I don't know. That's a conjecture. I don't know, but you could, you know, imagine the kids going to Adam and Eve, because they weren't born of human parents, right? So they didn't need the umbilical cord. Imagine kids going up to Adam and Eve, show us your belly, you know, without a belly button. I don't know. Maybe they did, maybe they didn't. But we had this culture of, oh yeah, we remember, you know, the Garden of Eden. You know, before the flood, the garden was still there. It was being guarded by the angels, right? They could have gone back. This is 1,700 years of history. They could have gone back to the garden or gone back to Adam for 900 years and talked to them and seen what it was like, even though they couldn't go in the garden. And then with the flood then as well, and with the time of Jesus as well, we've always known of God, and we just have, it's our choice now to trust him or not. But we see ancient man was very intelligent. We see ancient man dispersed from Babel due to all the similar evidences that we see around us. And that, I think ultimately we can clearly say the Bible is true. So keep thinking. That's another reminder. Keep thinking. Think for yourself. Don't just follow what I'm saying. Don't just follow what somebody on a documentary says if you go look these things up. Keep thinking and keep trusting the Bible, because what we do know is the Bible has good evidence that the Bible is true. The Bible explains the history of mankind, that Adam and Eve were created perfect in the garden. They sinned, just like we sinned. The world groaneth and travaileth because of sin. That's the world we live in today. And we cannot solve the problem of sin by ourselves. Jesus Christ is the only answer. I like this verse, one of my favorite verses, but in your hearts set apart Christ as Lord. That's huge. And keep studying, keep learning these things, because we want to always be prepared to give an answer to everyone who asks you to give the reason for the hope that you have, but do this with gentleness and respect. So let's turn to Christ, let's be prepared with these answers, and let's show that love and care for others around us as well. I hope that came across all right. Does that make sense? Do we have questions or comments? I didn't take all my time. I came in early. How often does that happen?
I have a question.
Okay, question in the back here.
It's a comment. You were talking about Chichen Itza in Mexico,
Yes.
and you know, they have where the by the solstice, it comes down and the bird takes over the head of the snake, you know, on the solstice.
Yeah.
But you get back a ways and you start clapping. And it'll echo back, and it sounds like a flock of birds coming at you.
Hmm.
Absolutely incredible.
Wow.
How they knew that before they built this thing that was how tall,
Yeah.
you know,
Yeah.
that it would, you know, it's talking about the bird and the snake, how they figured that out and knew that. I mean, they didn't stumble across it.
Yeah.
And then they, you know, they put their Mayan calendar together. And,
Yeah. Mayan calendar.
I mean, they were very intelligent.
Yeah.
It was just different than the things we study today.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. How interesting. Yeah, and there again, I think at Chichen Itza, you see the feathered serpent as more serpent worship, more mythology. That there's similarities to, I think, other cultures and worshiping other things as opposed to God.
Right, they got them in trouble.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah. Comment. Ruth?
Brian, you talked about the language, and you showed a couple different, looks like schematics or maps.
Yes.
I've never seen those before, but they all seem to focus back to one language. And I wonder what that one language was.
And then I think a lot of them was showing it actually kind of, it goes back to about 20 different languages, but yeah.
It definitely doesn't go back to one particular language.
Yeah, it wasn't
Okay,
showing
all right.
one. It was showing that they all kind of stopped without getting to that. It's kind of a.
Well, that would kind of
it's
make
kind
sense
of a,
because God
they're all just kind of
found-
there all of a sudden, and
Yeah,
you know,
okay.
we're looking at ancient
All right.
languages, you know,
Yeah.
from what we can tell with written documents and things going way back.
And they probably all lost their language because they lost technology.
That was probably huge. Where, you know, if I'm the, you know, architect and I'm trying to work with the blacksmith over here, if now we can't communicate, now he takes his skill with him, and maybe we don't have any blacksmiths anymore in our tribe or whatever. You might lose a lot of technology as you're splitting up, going across the globe, and I think, you know, maybe I didn't fully explain that too, as I was talking about spreading out from Babel too. You know, we see in our culture, they have the idea that Africa was where everything started, and well, the Middle East is close. And a lot of that's genetic, but I think based on the artifacts that they see too, very primitive stuff in Africa, primitive tools and things, very primitive tools in different locations here and there, and they'll look at these stone tools and say, oh, that's Stone Age man. Then they look at the bronze tools and the iron tools and these different tools throughout, the copper tools in there as well, as an evolution. Whereas I think it was some groups had some stuff, some didn't. And as they were able to build up their culture a little bit more, as they were able to establish a little longer in a certain location, they were able to, okay, now we can get some iron together and create some of these tools again. And so I think sometimes it's how long were they at a location where they maybe were living in a cave as primitive people, but then moved on to a different place. And what's left there, it looks like an older, less evolved people group. And I think that's the assumption that's taken with the secular mindset, where I don't think it necessarily has to be an evolution from primitive to more complex. I think it's what did they have and when did they have it as they're dispersing from Babel, if that makes sense. So it's a different way to look at the evidence, but I think still fits the evidence we have today. Go ahead.
Another question.
We all know that animals have instinct.
Yeah. Animals have
If
instinct.
God gave the animals instinct clear back to Adam and Eve, He must have given man a lot of more intelligent than plain instinct. And it was just something I was going to ask you if you wanted to comment on that. Kind of like animals have instinct, and we think those animals are so smart, you know. But we don't seem to give credit to man for being smart, because we think we evolved from the Neanderthal and we're worse than that, actually.
Yeah.
But the animal right beside the old Neanderthal is still a pretty smart animal.
Yeah. That's an interesting perspective.
Yeah.
Well, yeah, I mean, he named the animals, right? And so, right there alone, you know, it just tells you that there was something to all the naming, there was language, there was everything at the beginning.
Yeah. Adam named the animals, so he had an intelligence or a creativity to be able to name them and care for them potentially, but more so for the plants and things in the garden. That was his job. And so, you know, what did they know about the plants and things that, you know, wouldn't it be nice? You know, we've got these different herbs and these different things that supposedly have good health benefits. Now today I think we've lost a lot of the health benefits that these things used to have, because biologically we're going downhill from, it all started very good or even perfect genetically, and mutations happen, and so things are going from good, very good, to well, not so good today, and we're seeing a lot of problems with our health as a people group, and a lot of mutations affecting that. But even you know, you wonder, yeah, what did an apple taste like in the Garden of Eden, or what did it do to you? You know, how good for your body was it? You know, I think we can even see that sometimes where, you know, fruit in the last few decades is losing its nutritional value because we're tinkering it with it maybe, or modifying it, or whatever, you know, where we're growing it so fast from the land that it's not getting the nutrients it needs to really be as healthy as I think it could have been, or should have been, should be, or would have been back in the past. So things were very different in the past, and I think we are so it's ingrained in our culture to think of this from an evolutionary timeline, from we're evolving and getting smarter and better and better and better, but things keep cycling through, and God is present all throughout. God's in control all throughout that, and we should trust Him, whether we live today or whether we were back then. Interesting. You see the Bible over and over cycles through the history of people groups with the judges, where the people followed God and things were good, and then they were so good they turned on to worship themselves, you know, and what they could do for themselves, and forgot about God, and then fell into persecution, so that God could wake them up and turn them back to Him, and all that sort of thing. So history is very interesting. God's in control. That's the exciting thing.
God is in control. Brian, thank you so much for coming.
Mm-hmm.
Let's give him a round of applause. Brought us some really wonderful things here that we're able to see. And a few announcements here. Over in the room is plenty of coffee. There's, I think Linda made a cake. Some other things are over there, and there's cookies and coffee and hot water for hot chocolate. The kids that may want some, or anybody else that wants anything. There's also some artifacts and some rocks over there, and the display on Noah's Ark is over there. So there's a lot of stuff over there. So stop and see that. Brian has brought a tremendous layout of books for sale for Alpha Omega Industries. Definitely take a look at those books, and I haven't had a chance to look at them myself. And of course, we have our lending library, but make sure you take a look at those books. I mentioned that July, there's going to be no safari, and so our next meeting scheduled is August. And as you go out the door, get a flyer, and the name of this talk, get this, was Evolution Created to Murder God? That's a pretty serious question. And I would say the answer is yes. And Dr. Jerry Bergman is going to explain that. He has spoken a lot, written a lot of books about evolution. And he's taught for over 40 years, so be sure to pick up one of these flyers out of there. We just booked this thing night before last for him to come. And by the way, he's flying in from Ohio. So if any of you feel led that you'd like to sponsor a speaker coming in here, like Jerry or Brian, we would sure appreciate that. It goes a long ways. And so anyway, thank you very much for coming. See you over at the coffee. Thank you, Brian.
Thank you.
Oh, are you going to want help with these chairs? Is there